Um, I haven't had the time or the energy to really write or research or make a video or a podcast or do any of the intellectual and spiritual philosophical things that I have spent the last 15 years devoting my entire life to, because now that I have kids, I'm working not just teaching two classes online or more a term, but a full-time 40-hour a week job in medical industry uh, to make ends meet for my family. And so I have very little time or energy, and I feel like I'm like maybe in a manic episode because I'm so exhausted. Not literally, but I feel like this intense energy. I cannot go to bed right now until I get some things off my chest and maybe start um, make a video rambling a bit to get the juices flowing and start give myself a kick in the butt to start writing again about certain things. I'm not even gonna try to be formal. I'm sitting outside at midnight in my carport, vaping in my underwear, wearing my wife's oversized flip flops because I'm so mentally tired and done. And I feel like though there's so much I've been thinking about and processing and learning and reframing as I haven't been studying so much, right? I've been taking notes though. I've been thinking, reading when I can, but it's nothing compared to what I've spent the last like 15 years since I was a teenager doing. For the first time in my life since I was probably 16, I haven't been, just consuming different philosophical books. And I've just been, for the first time since basically my teen years, like actually processing this stuff and living in the world, right? And there's so many things I'm realizing I want to say, so many ideas that I'm connecting, and I just don't have the time to devote to all of them, right? So I want to like put this out there really informally to document these things for myself and for you and let you know where my mind is at for the few people who care about my work. Um, and yeah, so let me just start, right? These are the things I want to work on. And I would like help working on if anyone wants to work on them with me. But I mean, there's stuff that I've written about, like the metaphysics, right? The metaphysics of the forms of objects, the idea of a substantial form, and the identity of organisms. There's also things like the continuity and infinity of the material world, the unity of the entire physical creation as one organism, right? The nature of organisms. Yes, those are all interesting. Those aren't really the things I want to talk about in this video. Those are the things that maybe one day I'll get around to more fully researching and publishing formally on, which is, I think, a couple years down the line since I have, you know, young kids. But the spiritual implications of a lot of these things and of my study of the Christian tradition have really and of other religions, as I've been reading more about Taoism and Buddhism over the last year, especially Zen Buddhism. Um, these these things have brought up a lot of ideas that I want to write on, although I don't know what outlet other than Substack and videos and stuff I'd publish them in. And I guess the first one is that in Christian society, even in Eastern Orthodox, which is what I'm a part of, we really modern Christianity, even Orthodox Christianity, has this monastic influence where the prayer, almsgiving, fasting, and ritual are the highest expressions of Christian life. And basically, for those who think of Christ as an exemplar that we're supposed to be like and imitate, right? Uh, as a perfect man at the very least, because we've elevated those things above all else, right? Above creativity, above family life, above just being out in the world and taking things as they come and enjoying nature, right? If you're not actively praying, giving alms, engaging in liturgical ritual, or fasting, right? Everything else is just kind of lesser. And as a result that we think that way, we basically elevate a monastic and highly ascetic image of Christ over a more cosmopolitan Christ. We elevate the aspects of his humanity from the little we know about his human life. We elevate his asceticism. We elevate his insistence that following him means you have no home, that you have to get rid of all your wealth. And I don't want to get rid of those things, but that's, in a sense, that's very limited, and that's focusing only Christ's humanity. And we're imitating Christ's humanity. But the second you recognize Christ as divine, and the second you realize that who he is the logos, or the divine nous or something, right? The principle through which all of creation is born and its rational structure is given. The second you recognize that, and the second you take him as exemplar in the fullness of his person, both divine and human, you realize that you have to integrate the monastic, and you have to stop seeing Christ primarily through the lens of a monastic or ascetic, and you have to begin seeing him through the lens of logos, which includes those things, but also includes the absolute plenitude of joyous being, of budding flowers, and an infinite gradation of different species, and the beauty and messiness of this world, right? We have to learn from the world and see the logos in it, and the infinite possibilities that God contains in him. Well, seeing Christ through that lens, right, you get a much more inclusive and broad vision of what a good Christian looks like, right? This really is so ingrained into Christian culture, regardless of denomination. You see the image of a perfect Christian is a monk. And it's really bothering me in Orthodoxy that we have not overcome this, and that we're so influenced by this ideal, right? You don't think of a family man. You don't even think of a person who's devoted themselves to God through the other ascetic practices that aren't in a monastery, right? Which plenty of nuns and priests have lived in the world, right? And so, as Dostoevsky puts in The Brothers Karamazov, we see, he calls Alexei a monk living in the world, a monk in the world. Basically, we take that not to mean that you're finding a prayerful and beautiful and Christian way of participating in God through worldly activities, which is what Dostoevsky meant. We see that as it's basically living like a monk and fitting the image of a monastic or extreme ascetic in the world, right? And that devalues every other aspect of human life besides, again, prayer, fasting, almsgiving, liturgical ritual. It lowers all of that, and so you basically see the life of the mind, or the human creativity. You see those as lesser occupations. They're hobbies that you compartmentalize and put away, and maybe only do in your spare time, whereas ideally prayer, fasting, almsgiving, and ritual are taking up your primary focus, and you're resting and allowing yourself to indulge in these maybe even guilty pleasures of art, of philosophy, of meditation on those things, right? Of having a family. You have a family, according to St. Paul, because of a weakness, right? Is that really what we think Paul fully meant? And even if he did, are we going to follow him in that opinion, right? But being like the divine Logos, being like the Son, is being infinitely creative, infinitely wise, excelling in rationality. It's also prayer, fasting, ritual, almsgiving. He did that. But it's a million other things too. And I've been feeling that pressure on me to be like a monk in the world. And I have let myself feel that my learning art and my doing art is like a lesser pursuit than all those other things. From being Orthodox, that has now been ingrained into me. And I think it's inappropriate. I think it's wrong. I've gotten the advice a million times from priests and stuff, like, just read less. Just work less on philosophy and these things, right? These are all kind of like secondary to, again, prayer, fasting, almsgiving, ritual. And it's just it's bad advice, because for some people, how they connect to God, how they learn to love God and their neighbor, is through these things. I have a hard time with other things, but I have a really easy time getting excited and full of love and wonder when I am thinking about God in a theoretical or speculative way. When I'm meditating on philosophical topics, When I'm consuming, I hate that word. When I'm engaging with or creating art, beautiful art. But if we see our ideal exemplar as Christ the ascetic, and not Christ the fully fledged human being that's also the infinitely creative and rational principle of the world, we have a very restricted view of what a Christian should be focusing on. And I don't even think it fits just on a practical, experiential level. It does not fit with that narrow view of things does not fit with Christ, and does not fit with the church's insistence that the real goal is love, that you attain love, and that you attain love for God, and through love for God, all people, and you learn to love God through loving all people and creation, right? And there are clearly, for different personalities and backgrounds, different paths to growing that love. And when you flatten everyone into the monastic model, it creates a sense of duty and obligation, and then resentment. And I'm finding myself very resentful of the church, very resentful of Christianity. And I never thought I would be at that place. I've always thought I would never be one of those people that are like so frustrated that on certain days I don't even want to say I'm Christian. It has nothing to do with the actual, theology or anything. It has to do with what I see in this world and how I want to live, especially in the United States. So that's something I'm thinking about, and I'm summarizing as like Christ the monastic versus Christ the Logos or something like that, right? But it's just spiritual malpractice, as I've said elsewhere. It's naive folly for the consensus of many priests to tell people, stop reading and start doing this. Start praying more, right? It's a naive and restrictive view of what prayer is that doesn't even fit with when you read with someone like Isaac the Syrian, where prayer doesn't become literal prayer of saying words and of thinking certain thoughts, right? Directed at God as if you were talking to him, but it becomes a state of being and a state of the soul where the soul is transparent and participating in God, and where there's a certain level of awareness without necessarily it being the focus in a moment of God, an appreciation, love for God, right? That's not the prayer that we are striving for in most of Christianity now, right? It's not. And that prayer can come through reading, writing, art, creativity. It can also come through, and primarily for most people does, and for everybody should be engaged in these fundamentals: prayer, fasting, ritual, almsgiving. Those are non-negotiable parts of the Christian life. But it's that we see those things as the only things to focus on, and everything else is only to be engaged in insofar as they're conducive to that, right? And it's just, it's that intensity and rigor and extreme idealism where basically you're asking everyone to be a monk, that makes sense when you think the world is ending. That makes sense for the early Christians. Not that we are giving up on those things or devaluing them, but rather we're saying that those things conceived of as individual activities and pursuits, like I'm going out to work with charity and give people money directly right now, or I'm sitting down and reading a written prayer or praying conversationally with God. I'm engaging with ritual at church. I am fasting according to a specific, calendar. The formal and institutional aspect of these things, the rigorous aspects of these things, that's how we think about those. It narrows our view of what an ideal person should be like, and we lose sight of all these other things. We would basically mean that no one can ever be an expert in anything other than prayer and ritual and fasting. Everyone's like a hyper detailed autist priest, but there would be no master artists or brilliant philosophers, because those, if we get to enjoy those, they'll be in the next life. The world's ending soon, and we've got to be focused on doing what God, that narrow set of things that God wants us to do to save other people, right? It's apocalyptic and revolutionary and urgent, which I think Christianity should be, but at the expense of the recognition that, hey, Christ didn't come within 100 years. Right? There's the delay of the parousia. There's the delay of the second coming. I think it's not just a glib thing to say, oh, those people are too narrow-minded. Like, we have to really actually be thinking about this, because it changes. It either changes how we see Christ, how we conceive of Christ the exemplar, or it's a result of how we see Christ the exemplar, of what aspects we focus on him, right? Okay, so that's the first topic. The second topic is, and it's related to this, like American Christianity, whether it's Orthodox or not, is primarily American, because the American personality dominates everything else, right? Americans are weird. Us Americans are pretty reactionary and conservative and ignorant and uneducated, as the American flag is in the corner. I don't even know that anthem at this point, whatever. All of those things affect our Christianity. An American becomes Christian by Americanizing Christianity, not by Christianizing America, or Christianizing the American, right? And this is absolutely true of the Eastern Orthodox churches I've been in. There are very few people who, other than the ritual, other than the prayers, that they actually are Orthodox in any sense. They're just Americans who believe in God and Jesus, and also have taken on some extra ritual. They do not have a collectivist mindset, which is a non-negotiable for Christianity, but also, especially Eastern Christianity, when you're in these immigrant churches that are based on collections of people, communities, and then you're coming in as like a white American, and you're just like, oh, I'm a hyper individualist, and you make you end up making the church into essentially just an individualistic social club 1 or 2 days a week with no deep connection, right? You've just killed the real church, right? So Americans really do not have like a mindset. Americans can't be Christian unless they stop being American. You know, I don't mean that in a legal sense. I mean, until you kill the American within you or suppress them significantly, you cannot really see Christ. You cannot really be like Christ. I know what I said. Some people might get mad. Americanism, Christianity, incompatible, contraries. Nearly two ends of one spectrum. How I characterize Americans and Americanism again: individualism, hedonism. Even when you really strongly believe in like an objective morality, a tendency to fall back into the subjective. A pervading ignorance about history and the world, an anti-intellectualism, a emphasis on practicality and common sense, and a strong sense of entitlement to justice, in that everybody gets what's fair, right? There's also something deep about like a freedom of leave me alone and let me do whatever I want, right? None of those things are Christian. None of those things are anything like Christ or the saints. They're false freedoms, false individualities that actually just ends up annihilating you and everybody else. It's individualism to such an extreme that you cease to be. It's freedom to the extent that you no longer have any direction and you get paralyzed and cease to be, right? Very ugly and evil. So I think I've just reached a point. I have spent the last 15 years thinking I want to help reform Christianity in the United States. And I'm just realizing like you kind of just got to leave it. You have to not be a part of it. You have to be something else. And if you embrace that something else, people are going to think you're insane. If you really live out like the convictions of you know, I don't want to say a progressive Christian, but a Christian who has a broad sense of loving God through beauty, of pursuing things valuable for their own sake like knowledge and understanding, of who are developing these other sides of themselves and see that as an integral part of being human and what God wants us to do, right? If you're that type of person, like, I don't know. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. If you're that type of person and you want to be like that, and that is the ideal Christian, someone with radical openness and love for the infinity of God, right? In all of his different forms, you really can't fellowship with people who don't think that. You can go be part of the same institutions with them, but you can't see into their soul and they can't see into yours. And I guess that gets me to another point. I've written on this before. I really think Christ is calling us to like absolutely radical love. I think if you deny that, you're worse than a heretic, right? Christianity is a cult of love. That's what it is. Non-negotiable. If you deny that, if you don't have that love, you're not really a Christian because you're not really following Christ. It's that simple. Love and the centrality and infinity of divine love is so far above a dogma that it becomes an article of faith and yet surpasses the article of faith into the very matter that Christianity is made of. It's the most fundamental baseline, the goal of Christianity, the realization of perfect love everywhere. That's it. That's the foundation. Okay. Christ is calling us then to live in a radically different way. And I've written about this before. If you really live with that love, everybody would think you're insane. Dostoevsky's The Idiot, great example, right? Trigun, the anime, very good example of like an idealistic love for life and humanity, right? I've written about this before, but I really want to explore it more. You will, if you live that vision out, you will be a holy fool. You will be weird. And not just in like I'm quirky way, and not even in a punk rock countercultural way. People will just think you are mentally disabled or deficient. That's what The Idiot means. It doesn't mean a quirky guy. The Idiot, the title of that book is a retarded person, right? Like literally. That's how people will see you. They'll think, what is wrong with you? Part of that is a desire to radically and substantively engage with other people. Is to be able to, the way I describe it is look into their soul and they look into yours, and you lose self-awareness. You lose yourself in the other, and you're flowing together in a free, safe way, right? And time passes very quickly in those states. But if it's hard to explain, but if you experience it, you've known a reduction or elimination of self-awareness, not because you're a selfish jerk, but because you're safe and you're in love and you can see into the other person, they can see into you, and you're sharing something, you're unifying together. That is what the church is supposed to be. That is what Christ wants us to be with him and with all of creation, with every person, with every other Christian. And our duty as Christians is to go into a church and have that kind of community. And my frustration is that's not even a conversation on the table. Even in the best Orthodox parishes I've been to. That kind of unity is something it seems like almost no one's experienced, or if they have, it's only with their immediate family. Like, we can have this with each other, everyone. Whether you're a fascist or a Maoist, come to me. I'm ready to love you. Look, Christianity, the Christian ideal, has to be that we are seeking that kind of love. And I'll be nice to myself and then mean to myself. And nice to myself, I really, for whatever reason, am naturally oriented towards that kind of love and understanding and cherishing of other people. I really am. I have massive empathy and compassion fatigue right now, so I'm just numb. But ever since I was a kid, I'm very much, I'm capable of that kind of connection and that love for people. And it was beaten out of me, and I have been hiding it for the last 5 or 6 years, right? Probably since I graduated and got my master's, like, and started teaching. Like, I feel like I died during COVID in this way. Like, I just don't feel safe around anyone. And I want to be like that again. And I want to do that. But I start to do that, and then I find that no one even really wants to do that. And it reminds me of that amazing quote from Maria Skapsova when she says, the most terrifying and horrible thing is that no one wants to create a society based on brotherly love. That it all has to be done through force, no matter what side you're on. Whether you're a fascist or a communist, right? It's all through force. not through love. No one really wants to love each other. That's the horrifying thing about the modern world, is that that's revealed, right? According to Maria Skapsova, the modern world shows us clearly the depravity of mankind and how we do not want to love each other. Andrei Tarkovsky calls it like we're in the time of plague and pestilence. And what we need right now is to rekindle that love through feasting during the plague. You could read my Substack, like Finding Reasons to Live During and After Enshittification for that. But what we need is to drop everything else and focus on that and attaining that. It needs to be preached from the pulpit. It needs to be said in every homily. We don't know this. I've met very few people in my tradition, in Orthodoxy, who really know that and think about the radical nature of love. It's all institutional. It's almost always institutional. And we're just ignoring what Christ calls us to be. So in my experience with American Christianity, all the things, individualism, hedonism, like an allergicness to being real with other people and an inability to really connect, like those are all tied together, and they'll produce that inability to connect like that with other people. And most spouses don't even have that with their spouse, right? They're just like friends and romantic, not partners, because a partner would have that unity. They just live their separate lives, mentally closed off walls, even if they're coming together for sex or for raising children and managing finances together. They're not really together. You're not really loving someone until you can penetrate into their heart and them into you. And it can be done in this life. It can be done in this life, and that also intimates to me, or indicates to me, that can be done with God in us in this life. And I think that's more of a matter of letting go rather than pushing. I'm a pusher, I'm a striver. American culture is a hustle culture, is a pushing and a striving culture. But it needs to be like it needs to be transformed into letting go and easing those anxieties that drive so much of our bad behavior and our lack of love. And I am optimistic in that. I hope and I suspect that by letting go, that love will begin to bloom again. I think modern man, despite being hedonistic, is also like extremely burnt out. And it sounds weird, but we need a sort of joyous, beautiful rest and relaxation and beauty, right? Again, Tarkovsky, feasting during the plague. Beauty will save the world, Dostoevsky, right? But I think in a way, despite having, especially Americans, like way higher living standards than everyone in history. Look at this. Like this crappy carport is way nicer than most people through history's houses, right? I forgot what I was going to say. Oops. Whatever. I'm exhausted. It's going on for way too long. Oh, but yeah. So Americans especially, but the modern man in general, with all the horrors I think we've seen, and the looming disaster and destruction over our heads, climate change, which even if you don't believe in it, it's still looming there, right? Takes up a lot of mental space. Nuclear war, right? The terrors of the modern world and the vastness of our capability to destroy ourselves and others, paired with the lack of love and sort of the collective anhedonia that we have, we are so not in the place for most of us to become extreme ascetics. I don't deny that that is, for many people, what would be good and needed, right? Especially maybe someone's like a great example, like someone who's just like really addicted to sex and food and riches. But for other people who what they're suffering from is a distraction and a listlessness, I think a lot of those people need to really have their hearts restarted by alleviating some burdens and then being presented with positive visions of beauty, not negative visions, right? And I recognize that everyone agrees the ultimate goal is love and letting go and participating in God's love. So that's not yourself striving and pushing on your own, but it's that God is working through you and in you and as you, right? Everyone agrees with that who is capable of speaking and thinking that way in the Christian tradition. But the difference is that some people, the monastically minded, need to push and strive, and hopefully by pushing and striving they reach a point of change and discipline that cultivates love, and then they're able to let go. But for many people, that's not the path. Many people like me who are super neurotic need to let go. And in the moments of letting go, we start to see and love God and other people, right? I don't need an increase. I need a decrease in the neuroticism, in the striving, right? So as you can tell, all of these ideas are really wrapped up in each other, right? I guess to summarize, those big things I'm thinking about writing about is Christian spirituality and the Christian life and mindset of what do we prioritize, the monastic model of Jesus or the cosmopolitan logos, right? And how that interacts with American identity and how that shapes the Christianity that Americans identify with and participate in. That's a huge and then whether we should live our lives along that model, or if we can allow ourselves to be, maybe we give our lives to God through art or something, right? This diversity of paths. And how that relates also to man's modern predicament of just feeling completely alienated, isolated, and listless and distracted, and that the correct antidote to that might be partying in a holy and beautiful way. Coming together for a feast. These are all so related to each other. And you can see if I'm correct about that, of that we need to feast now and relish in wholesome beauty and joy and happiness and pleasure for many of us. If I'm right about that, then the monastic vision of Christ, right, that being the ideal, is undermining what the modern world actually needs. I think we need to be revitalized and rejuvenated through beauty. And I think Dostoevsky believed in that too. And so did Tarkovsky. And Maria Skapsova, right? these are all related, and I'm not exactly sure where to go from there, right? The last thing that I want to just flag for my future interests would be, oh, I don't know. Should I talk about that here? Maybe I'll just leave it there. Those are the biggest things. There's one more thing, but I can make that a separate video. I guess I'll just flag it right here. This also has to do with the way we conceive of Christian history and how Christian history is moving and how scripture and tradition work in Christian history. So for instance, I'm at this point, I basically read the Bible like as a weird thing, organic thing that God injected over time into human culture and helped through a bunch of mysterious ways found Judaism, but is also injecting things into other cultures as sort of like an evolutionary stimulus to transcend our current selves, right? And be divinized and move towards God. And I don't see that in any clean way of the question of like inerrancy and how you interpret scripture in order to make it all coherent and perfect and authoritative and infallible just means almost nothing to me now, right? Like I see it as an organic living text and a living organism that we're engaging with, and that act of engagement is shaping us, right? Is molding us as individuals, but also, you know, the human organism as a collective over time, right? I think if God works in any way, that's how he works. As Plato says, like, God doesn't want to work by force. God does not use force. I think if God is working with us, if God is revealing himself to us, it is through a subtle, messy process of influence and injection, basically an extended species-wide reflective equilibrium of creation working itself out. And again, I'm not like a process theologian or something. I'm like, I would consider myself like a classical theist. Like, I don't think God changes or works himself out, but I do think his creation is, you know, to kind of harken back to Aristotle, like his creation is fluxing and rotating around the center that is God, in imitation to be like him, to strive after him, to love him and attain him. Again, the whole creation is an organism, which gets into some of the metaphysics that I'm interested in as well, right? Trying to think of how to close this out. I feel like there's something. I guess through all of this is that, like, a big thing is I'm at the point in my life where I'm just like so burnt out and tired that I feel like the only two paths left is to essentially live as much as I can like an idealist who is going to end up everybody thinking you're a fool, kind of like a holy fool, but not feigning insanity, right? You know, living as a sort of eccentric that doesn't fit in anywhere and just takes love where you can find it, or kind of suppressing these parts of myself and just trying to keep quiet, keep my head down, do the work, go to church every Sunday, have nice small talk with people. But that feels like settling. Everything feels like settling. You know? A very narrow vision of Christianity feels like settling for something less than robust of what God is. Participating in American Christianity thinking I'm going to reform it from within instead of just stepping outside and being like, I'm not involved in this. I'm a Christian in a different way. I'm doing something different. I'm not going to get dragged down by all of this, right? Being within feels like settling and compromising. Not being radically transparent with others and opening yourselves up to and being vulnerable to see into each other's souls, that feels like settling. It feels like living in expectation of how you know people in the world are, but not as you believe they should be, right? Living practically versus living by ideals, acting from a perfectly good will or something, right? It feels like settling. And settling is not Christian. Settling is not what Christ says to do. We're not supposed to settle. He's radical. Sell all you have and give to the poor. And most fundamentally, love God with your entire being. And that means your entire being can never settle for anything less than being fully devoted to infinite beauty, splendor, creativity, rationality, knowledge, life, goodness. And it just feels like I myself as a scrupulous person, I'm just like so, I feel the pressure to settle. And all of my past theoretical, I won't say speculative spiritual training in philosophy and Christian thought and practice, like it all of that is pushing back, saying don't settle. You'll be a weirdo, but don't settle. And on a personal level, I find that for me, but as I talk to more and more people that are like have a similar background or interest to me, they're saying the same things. I'm finding it here or there, but I'm not finding it's not crystallizing anywhere. It's these things I'm talking about, I can point to a bunch of people saying similar things, but it's not clearly coming together to tell us don't settle. And so I feel like I'm just going and saying I'm going to end up settling and just going through the motions. Yeah, I don't know if this made any sense. I'm so tired. It's way too late. I'm uploading this against my better judgment. Sorry that I look terrible. Look how white my beard is. It's crazy. But hey, authenticity, transparency, real grit, infinite love. Let's all do that, Hey man, let's do that. Good night.